Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo Chapter 10 is here, so let's get straight into it. Alright, so Chapter 10 is titled Majority Vote, and we pick up back in the present. We are no longer in the Samoran flashback, but instead are with Usami, Mino, and a bunch of other Earthling officials who are gathered around a conference table watching a projection of when Maru went berserk a few chapters back. And one of the officials says, "Can we really allow something like this?" And Usami says, "Meaning?" And the official says, "Don't you think we're letting the aliens get away with way too much? I mean, I heard it was the Samoreans who refused your suggestion, Usami, for escort." And Usami says, "All that happened in this case is that both sorcerers were incapacitated. So Special Envoy Maru stepped in to resolve the situation. There's nothing more to it." Another guy then chimes in and says, "But when the second year Tsurugi Okotsu attempted to intervene, Special Envoy Maru tried to harm him." And Mino's like, oh gosh. We then see a flashback where Usami is telling Mino to delete the footage of when Maru attacked Tsurugi. And we see Mino in the present in this meeting kind of just looking at Usami, and he's thinking, "I deleted it, Usami, like I swear I deleted it." We then see that another one of the officials in this meeting says, "So according to Article 7 of the Jujutsu regulations, the Samoreans should be categorized as threats." And Usami just says, "No, not according to the Hikari provision." And the guy says, "What?" And somebody else says, "The Hikari provision?" And then a young girl who is also here says, "A long time ago, there was talk about making jujutsu battles into performances as a form of public gambling." And somebody says, "What?" And she says, "The government made the existence of cursed spirits public due to the culling game, so Article 8's secrecy clause basically lost all meaning." The girl then continues and says, "Ultimately, the plan for the performances was scrapped too, and people are thinking, how did they ever think that would get approved in the first place?" And the girl continues and says, "Anyway, the Hikari provision was created when they made preliminary revisions to the Jujutsu regulations, and it includes a clause that allows sorcerers to engage in paid combat." And people are like, "Oh, I had no idea." And she says, "Well, that's because nowadays you'd never run into that provision unless you're getting hired as a personal bodyguard." It's at this point that Usami chimes in and says, "Special Envoy Maru, Tsurugi Okotsu, and Yuka Okotsu all have signed contracts with me. And under the Hikari provision, there's no problem with jujutsu battles between contracted individuals." We then see a quick flashback of the three of them signing these contracts, and Maru has no idea what it says because he can't read Japanese, and Usami's just like, "Sign it." We then cut back to the meeting where somebody says, "That's ridiculous, okay? Only sorcerers approved by Jujutsu headquarters are allowed to engage in combat for hire." And Usami says, "Well, Maru was hired as my general bodyguard." And the girl then says, "Are you trying to say that this was all an accident caused by a latent sorcerer?" Then just gets some meta narration provided by Mino in this case. He says, "A latent sorcerer is someone who uses jujutsu unknowingly. Incidents caused by latent sorcerers are treated with leniency, so they're not usually punished." People are starting to get like upset in this meeting, and one guy says, "I'm telling you, this is ridiculous. It should be a known fact that Samoreans wield cursed energy." And somebody else says, "Well, we don't know for certain if that's true for all Samoreans." And this guy says, "Why are you going out of your way to side with these aliens?" And Usami says, "Why are you going out of your way to side against them?" Guy responds and says, "Because in diplomacy, once they stop taking you seriously, it's all over. And they've already kept us in check once. It's time for us to demonstrate the power of our own deterrent. We need to find Yuji Itadori." And it's at this point that we get these two panels here where it just shows Yuji hooded up, standing amongst a crowd. Our boy is alive and they are looking for him. Usami just looks at this guy and says, "It's all over once they stop taking us seriously?" Sure, that may be true for an individual or for a private company, but that kind of mindset doesn't apply to international relations. If you want to stir things up just to feel like you're getting something done at work, then that's your own business. But don't drag the rest of us or our country into it. The guy just doesn't even say anything in response, and he's clearly kind of like ashamed at just getting told off. And Usami and Mino then leave the room, and as Usami leaves, he says, "Apologize to him later for me, will you?" Mino says, "I don't think you were in the wrong here, Usami, but I don't think searching for Yuji Itadori could hurt either. Plus, nothing good ever happens from making enemies of your own people. We then cut to an elder Samoran and Osuki, who is the Samoran that Cross punched when he was a little kid, if you'll recall. And Otsuki says, why does an outsider like Dabra get the final say? What's the point of discussions and the vote then? And the elder says, well, that's how a controlled council system works. And Otsuki says, how's that any different from a dictatorship? And the elder says, this is what Maru and Cross decided. They said now that Dura is gone, Dabra is the most qualified to be our chieftain. And they think that because he's an outsider, he can make the most objective decisions. And Osuki says, I'm sick and tired of those brats. I hate Cross especially. He thinks he can walk all over me. It's basically Dabra's fault we got chased off of our own planet anyway. And the elder says, but could you really beat him, Osuki? Or even the twins, for that matter? And he just says, damn. And the elder says, just stay calm. The decision maker can only veto a council decision twice. Maru's injury is already common knowledge amongst the council. We'll get the same majority vote this time, just like the time before. As they've been talking, they've been walking, and we see that they now finally arrive to this big, chamber area with a bunch of seats, and they begin to take their seats. And the elder says, this time we'll finally get what we want. And Osuki says, I can't wait to crush this island nation. A country with no military being the point of contact? Don't see an opportunity like that every day. And the elder says, we only have superficial knowledge of Earth's military technology. Luckily for us, the country we're negotiating with is a sorcerer state. And Osuki says, if we try to play nice, aiming for coexistence, they're just going to think we're weak and we'll get stolen from again. We should take a strong stance, even if it means confrontation. And the elder says, first, we need to set up an autonomous zone in their capital. I won't budge on that. And Osuki says, and this time we'll be like the Discunte. I'll never let someone steal from us again. We then cut to see Jabaloma and Cross approaches him and says, Jabaloma, why are you withholding your answer about whether or not we should coexist with these earthlings? And Jabaloma looks at him and says, why? Because you're doing the same. And Cross is like, what? And Jabaloma says, you're not sure what to do either, Cross. And we see Cross thinks back to his conversation with Yuka, where Yuka told him, that's why you disguised yourself as Maru, isn't it? To learn more about us. Am I wrong? We then cut back to the present, where Jabaloma says, you and I each carry 10 votes. So if we vote for coexistence, then surely it will overturn what's been the majority decision up until now. I suppose Dabra could veto it again, though. So you decide, Cross, and I'll follow your lead. And Cross says, but don't you have your own wishes on the matter, Jabaloma? And Jabaloma says, entrusting to others is plenty valid a wish. We then cut to Cross sitting in that same chamber where he is making his vote for coexistence or for war. And we see him thinking back on everything. He thinks back to the little boy whose balloon he retrieved for him. He thinks back to Tsurugi apologizing to him. And he thinks back to Yuka saying, we can put an end to this, Cross. And then he thinks back to Dura and how Dura says that cities and villages were once built on the ideals of someone long ago. Cross then thinks about his homeland and then how his homeland was razed to the ground and his parents were killed. And Cross is just struggling with this decision. Jabaloma then approaches center stage to announce the results of the vote. And he says, we have reached a majority. We will strive for coexistence with the Earthlings. Our first step toward this goal should be better understanding Japan, the representative country of Earth. Let us set up discussions and a cultural exchange with them to facilitate that. Osuki jolts up from his chair and says, what? Wait, Cross, Jabaloma, you were against coexistence before. Cross says, no, we were just withholding our judgment until now. Osuki screams, Maru isn't even here. This vote should be invalid. Cross says he already clearly stated his stance was in favor of coexistence before this meeting. Osuki gets angry and then looks to Dabra and says, Dabra, what will you do? Dabra is just kind of nonchalantly sitting on the throne looking at his nails and he goes, it sounds fine to me. Osuki says, damn you, all you ever do is deny our wishes. Dabra says, conflict or invasion, to put it bluntly, can be done at any time. However, once we begin an invasion, there will be no further chance to properly understand each other. So let's get to know each other first. Didn't we leave Samoria in search of our neighbors to begin with? We then cut to after the vote, where we see Jabaloma and Cross walking down a hallway, and Jabaloma just says, "Cross, I deeply respect you." And Cross says, "Please, don't say that. I'm just tired, that's all." You then cut to the human headquarters, where we see Usami now with Tsurugi and Yuka having a meeting with Jabaloma and Cross. And we're kind of cutting into this meeting after some things have been shared off panel. So the first thing we're seeing is Usami reacting to some of this information. And he thinks to himself, when I first heard they were driven from their planet after losing a duel, I wasn't convinced. But now I understand that Dabura wasn't the one that lost. They lost to him. Yuka then out loud says, Kalyans die eventually, right? So clearly, like, Jabaloma must have told them all about their true history. And she says, Kalyans die eventually, right? So every time a Kalyan dies, Rumelians? Jabaloma says, Kalyans are immortal, so they won't die from natural causes. They can only be killed. Yuka says, wow. And Tsurugi says, no wonder you treat them all as sacred beasts then. Usami then says, regarding the cultural exchange, I'm thinking maybe a dinner party? Would that be good? Jabaloma says, that sounds wonderful. I'll send Maru and Cross to help with the preparations. Usami then looks to Yuka and Tsurugi and says, so can I count on you two for us then? And they're both like, what? And Tsurugi says, we can't cook anything fancy. And Yuka says, we then just cut to Yuka and Maru throwing their arms around each other and just shouting, welcome to Yuka and Maru's Deli Deli Kitchen. And Tsurugi and Cross are just like, the what now? And Yuka says, you've never heard of that old cooking show? It's gotten super popular again. And Maru says, I only did what she told me to do. And they say, you sound like some delinquent's lackey. Yuka says, okay, first, let's make sure there aren't any problems with our list of foods. Then we just have to make them and taste them. And Tsurugi says, well, what do you mean problems? And she says, you know, like if any Samorians have any kind of allergies or if Rumelians avoid certain foods due to their religion. And Tsurugi is like, oh, right, there might be some meats that are similar to Kalyans. And Yuka looks at them and goes, do you guys eat meat? And Maru says, oh, you don't have to go to that much trouble. And Cross says, every Kalyan's form is unique. Rumelians eat livestock raised for meat as well as what you Earthlings would call fish. And Tsurugi says, oh, you guys have oceans? And Yuka says, of course they did. Oceans are the source of all life. And Maru says, there were no sharks, though. Real quick aside from me here, the fact that Cross revealed every Kalyan has a unique form is so interesting. Like, I might make another video on this sometime this week. But no wonder Maru thought that guy Shikigami was a Kalyan, because they are just maybe even, like, sorceress entities. Again, maybe another video where we deep dive on that a bit. Anyways, we cut back to Yuka reading over the list and she goes, whoa, we don't have any flour-based dishes on this list. And Tsurugi is like, yeah, it's not just Japanese food, so that's probably why. And Yuka says, sure, but how can you skip that stuff? It's criminal. And Tsurugi says, true, those foods are popular in other countries as well. And Maru says, flour-based food? And Yuka says, you know, like that takoyaki we ate together. Maru's eyes get huge as he remembers that food and he just screams at his brother. He says, Cross! Takoyaki is delicious! Tsurugi then says, is Maru super picky? Like, does he have weird tastes? And Cross says, no, not really. And so Tsurugi says, okay, well then other Samorians should like it too. And Yuka says, all right, our cultural exchange is going to be a takopa. And Maru says, oh, is that a new word you made up for a takoyaki party? Fantastic. You're such a smarty pants. And she goes, now that that's settled, it's time to go shopping for the fillings. And meanwhile, Tsurugi like pulls up a video on his watch and he's like, it's this, like, it's like this. And Maru's like, fillings? And Yuka says, yeah, you can put all sorts of things inside, like mochi. And Maru goes, mochi? We then just see Cross watching this video Tsurugi is showing him about takoyaki, and he's just imagining all of the Samorians eating this food, and he's like starting to sweat, and he's like, I don't know about this. And that's where the chapter ends. Another absolutely fantastic chapter. I am loving this series, y'all. We got a Yuji mention, a confirmation that he's still alive, and they are looking for him. Like, we're gonna see more of our boy in this series. We got a Hikari mention. Are you kidding? They made a law about our boy, and we just find out more about how this society works. You know, they put Dabura in charge because he's the strongest. He can veto the majority vote, but only twice. And we do have the revelation that the first majority vote was for conflict, but Dabra overruled them, right? And this second vote is for coexistence, thanks to Cross and Jabaloma, and Dabra didn't overrule that. So I'm loving this, man. I'm loving this. I do have things I want to talk about, like the Kalyan thing, but I'm going to make other videos for that. But in the meantime, let me know all of y'all's thoughts on this video, or on this chapter, I mean, and the video as well. But as always, thank you for watching.